activists out there are very much against this, where people can come and grow. And of course, it's been proven that marine land is a huge contributor to the economic well-being of Niagara Falls as well. So I stand firm, and we stand strong as a caucus. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Further debate. The member for Parkdale High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to stand and speak to this bill. We remember back, in 2012 when the first articles, excellent articles that appeared in the Star were written by Linda Diebel and Liam Lacey. And they were articles that outlined the condition of animals at Marineland. And it wasn't something that they invented. They're journalists, and they're good ones. It's something that they heard from the workers at Marineland, the young people who were just earning over minimum wage there, people like Christine Santos, Jim Hammond, Phil Demers, who were the trainers, who loved the animals and took care of them. Absolutely, they took care of them, and absolutely, they loved them. And that's why they came forward to the Star. Now, the sad reality that came from all of that is that all those three were fired. I'm going to talk about anti-SLAPP legislation in a minute, which was originally our bill, Mr. Speaker. It was originally the New Democratic Party bill that brought in anti-strategic lawsuit against public participation, anti-SLAPP defamation suits. And this is a classic defamation suit that is happening against not only Christine Santos, Jim Hammond, and Phil Demers, who are all workers, who needed those jobs, who did those jobs well, and who loved those animals, but also the Toronto Star, $7 million, the Georgia Strait, Digital Journal, and lots of other smaller organs of communication that simply wanted to have a discussion about how to keep marine mammals, if you're going to keep them at all, in captivity, and how this perhaps wasn't the way. So I want to dedicate my comments to them, and I also want to dedicate it to people like Carly Ferguson. Oh, sorry, Mr. Speaker, I forgot. I believe we have unanimous consent to stand down the lead. Forgot to say that right up front. So can I ask for?
I have to ask the House. The member for Parkdale High Park is seeking the unanimous consent of the House to stand down the lead speech on this bill for the New Democrats. Agreed? Agreed. Agreed.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. So I want to dedicate my comments to them and also to groups like Captive Animal Watch, Carly Ferguson here, OSPCA trained, sitting, and Dr. Gitta Fenger, a veterinarian here, and all the veterinarians, including the Veterinary Association itself, that is now, by the way, investigating the veterinarians that were part of this at Marineland and have been for a number of years. The other sad reality is that Smooshy, we all remember Smooshy, remember Larry, remember Kiska from those stories. They were brought so vividly home to us with those pictures. And 3 years after those Star investigative pieces, those animals are still in the same condition. They're still in the same place. Really nothing much has changed. The water is cleaner, tanks are cleaned a little bit more often, but really nothing much has changed. You all heard me quote from Yves Cousteau. You heard me quote from Rick O'Barry, the narrator in The Cove. You heard me talk about Blackfish, that movie that outlined so well the condition in SeaWorld of orcas, where they're kept in off-season in sheds. In sheds. Imagine this creature that swims for miles, that dives, kept in a shed. And again, I go back to that image. Imagine you being kept in a bathtub in solitary confinement. That's what it's like. Is Kiska getting medical attention? Oh, yes, she is, because she desperately needs it. Because no animal like her can live in those conditions. She is heavily medicated. That's the simple reality, and so would you be if you lived in those conditions. She's lost 5 of her offspring. 5 have died, one after the other after the other. Surely this calls for action, and that's what we're getting. There are some concerns, however, because, yes, orcas, we think Free Willy, but there's also dolphins there. There's also belugas there. In fact, we think there's over 40 belugas there, and they're breeding. Why would this legislation only look at orcas and not look at belugas and not look at dolphins, which again marine experts and marine mammal experts have called for legislation around? But I'm hopeful. I live in hope, otherwise I wouldn't do this job. And I am hopeful that the ministry, through their regulations, which are going to be forthcoming, and also through their expert panel, will actually come back with other regulations and other asks, and I suspect they will. And I hope it's done quickly for Kiska's sake and for all the animals' sake, not just at Marineland, but of course everywhere, because that's what we're talking about here. I want to talk about those young trainers too, because you know this is a situation that hasn't only hurt those with fins, it's also hurt those with 2 legs. And so those trainers are still, as I say, fighting those lawsuits just for doing their jobs. I'm going to read you some of the issues that have been raised around this bill. And I was happy to hear that ZooCheck, we heard one of the members talk about animal justice. I'm going to be talking about them as well. And other organizations are actually part of that expert panel. I was happy to hear that. So I already talked about the breeding of other cetaceans and other marine mammals, and how they should also be captured with this bill. But the Rosen report recommended additional regulations for facilities acquiring new wild-born animals, but Ontario has not acted on that recommendation, and I don't see it here. What do I mean by that? That means that Ontario can still allow whales and dolphins brutally captured from the wild to be brought into the province. It could, you know, Marineland could still get belugas and dolphins, capture them from Russia. They could even purchase dolphins from the dolphin fishery in Japan that the Cove is based on. And my goodness, if you never want to sleep again, have nightmares forever, watch the Cove. It's awful. And of course, we've talked about Kiska and what is going to happen to her. And that's a primary concern. How are we going to deal with her? So I hope the government gives itself some powers to be able to deal with that. And talking about powers, there are concerns, of course. And I heard what the member from Chatham-Kent Essex said about the OSPCA. By the way, we in the New Democratic Party supported Frank Klee's bill to have oversight over the OSPCA. We absolutely think it should. It is a private charity. And as such, as a private charity, does not have to disclose its book, so it does not have to, have its practices open and transparent. I hope by giving this extra $5 million a year to them, the government will demand some accountability also, demand them to open their books, demand to look at their practices and to have a say about those practices, because this is significant taxpayers' money now that's going into the OSPCA. And the member from Chatham-Kent Essex was absolutely right. There have been problems with the OSPCA in the past. We think about, it was 100 dogs euthanized because they had ringworm, a treatable condition, and it was only the outcry from the member himself in Newmarket, Aurora, and from residents around there that said enough, that made them stop, So just giving money to them isn't going to, confirm that something will be done about marine mammals either, unless there is oversight. And there's no reason that the Ministry of Community Safety and Community Services shouldn't be that ministry to have that oversight. Somebody has to. Ombudsman would be good. We like the Ombudsman, what he does. But somebody should have oversight over what the OSPCA does and what they don't do. And also, of course, when they open their books as a private charity, that brings up other concerns, and the concerns are very clear, Mr. Speaker. The concerns are those of any private charity who then we call upon to enforce, rules or regulations or laws. And that is, who are they getting their money from? Who are they getting their money from? Rumor has it, although again we don't know for sure, that Marineland is one of the major contributors to the OSPCA. Now I ask you, Mr. Speaker, if that is the case, how, or any other facility for that matter, we could single out any roadside zoo, any roadside zoo anywhere, and ask if this body, the OSPCA, is supposed to be auditing and enforcing rules over a facility that donates to them, is this not a conflict of interest? Again, I go back to the ministry, I ask them, OSPCA, in all of its capacity, needs oversight. We have no one else to turn to, so we got to turn to them. But let's make sure that the job is done well. I don't fault the individual enforcement officers there. I believe they have the best interests of animals at heart. But mistakes are made. Clearly, mistakes were made with 100 dogs that were euthanized. So let's have some oversight. Talking about oversight, here's the most frightening thing of all. This is so shocking that I would ask almost for a moment of silence, at least inhale before I say this. Because in Ontario, you need a license for a cat, you need a license for a dog, but you don't need a license for an orca or a tiger. Think about it. Think about it. If I had the wherewithal, I could import a tiger and keep it in my backyard. And by the way, people are doing just about that with roadside zoos, and we've had some terrific occurrences because of that. I know members might remember the attack by a tiger from a roadside zoo because there are no laws governing them. There's no licensing governing them. This is appalling. This is ridiculous. This is dangerous, and this is the case here. So I hope that one of the regulations that the ministry looks at with their expert committee, and I know this goes beyond the scope of aquariums, but is to look at bringing in what a couple of backbench Liberals, David Zimmer being one and the day now minister, brought in bills to this effect, which is we need licensing for those who will have exotics and marine mammals. We need licensing for this. We've had enough bad experiences in the province. It's ridiculous we don't have this done. Nothing much is going to change until we do. Here's a situation that needs to be remedied. Maybe this is a place to do it. I don't know. Maybe it's beyond the scope of the bill, but it's certainly an amendment that we as New Democrats will look at and will want to see some movement on. Because my goodness, you know, just because you have a lot of money, you shouldn't be able to get a whale and keep it in a bathtub. Got it, right? Shouldn't be able to get a lion and keep it in your backyard either. What else should we say? Animal Justice has done some phenomenal work, and I want to give them a shout-out, as well as the Star and others who did some great investigative journalism. They made a series of recommendations about the OSPCA and about really animal welfare generally, and I think they're important to just go over. It's interesting that the member from Chatham-Kent Essex didn't mention the fact that, of course, they would like to see things change at Marineland too, but they also want to see things change at OSPCA. They want to see the separation of shelter and investigative mandates. And again, that just makes some sense. They want to establish, and I've talked about this before, the independent oversight of the OSPCA. What else do they want to do? They want to amend the OSPCA Act to authorize preventative medical care during redemption periods. This means that when they take the animals in from wherever, when they're seizing animals, that they have to look after them, but that they don't charge back to the people whose animals they seized if, again, there was no fault of that. It was filed, there's no fault. That they establish minimum standards of care for their own shelters. Think about it. We ask of the OSPCA that they establish minimum standards of care for their own shelters. Again, I go back to the ringworm and the 100 dogs euthanized. Establish minimum standards of care. That seems to be kind of a no-brainer. And, of course, the regulatory oversight of zoos and aquariums, which I think needs some policy changes here, and hopefully that's going to be happening. So that was Animal Justice. Wonderful group of folk, many lawyers among them. I'll give you another example, which is actually quite startling. I'm going up to a primate sanctuary in next month to visit, among other primates, the IKEA monkey. Remember? The IKEA monkey, who was seized with good reason from its owner. That same owner has gone up and got 2 more monkeys. 2 more monkeys. The same owner. I mean, again, so I call upon the ministry, I call upon the minister, let's look at the licensing and how it works for exotics, primates being among them. You know, you shouldn't be able to have a monkey without a license. Come on, you shouldn't be able to have a monkey probably at all, I think, but hey, maybe they're fine someplace, but somebody's pet. But let's, for heaven's sakes, have some oversight, have some licensing, have some regulatory body looking at them. I mentioned off the top that never before in my experience of this House has a petition garnered so much support as the petition for changes at Marineland specifically, growing out of the STARS investigative report and the good work of the trainers who worked there and came forth. 85,000 signatures through change.org were delivered to the then Premier of the day, Dalton McGuinty. Here's the sad reality, Mr. Speaker. We're still talking about it. 3 years later, it's 2015. I certainly hope for speedy passage of this bill. I certainly hope that the regulations that they bring forward add immensely to the scope of this bill, because it needs to happen. And ultimately, you know, when we really think about it, what do we really want? We really want the best for the animals that are still there as well. We want what's best for them. And that may mean a number of things. I'm not the expert. We need to hear from the experts. We need to see some action. You know, back in the days when I was in seminary, we were asked, we had to do as part of our graduation from seminary, a year-long stint in some facility, some institution, pastoral stint. And, you know, many of them, I ended up doing mine in a hospital, but Sick Kids was one of them. And I knew in my heart of hearts that I couldn't do that. I could not be the chaplain at Sick Kids. I just didn't have the wherewithal. It took more, I'll freely admit, more than I have in terms of courage to deal with children who are suffering. Maybe children who are suffering, Mr. Speaker, I could have dealt with, but children who are being abused and caused to suffer by someone who has power over them, I knew I could not deal with. And I certainly couldn't be forgiving and loving to the abuser. It's beyond me. What I can do, what we all can do as legislators, is stand up for the vulnerable and the marginalized in this place, which I've tried to do, these almost 9 years later, in a variety of contexts. Here is one of those contexts. I think we all know, studies show, the early signs of psychopathy or sociopathy in children are when they hurt animals. We know this. We know that we have power over animals. We know this. We are more powerful than they are in many ways. So it is incumbent upon us, to watch what we do, to monitor our behavior and the behavior of other animals, to look after that which we have been gifted with. It's that simple. And what we're calling for here, I believe that I was hoping we were all of one accord, not so sure after the comments from the member from Chatham, Kent, Essex, but I live in hope. But I think, you know, from the government side and certainly from our side, we want to move forward to see something happen. We want, over here, the New Democratic Party to have it happen a little faster, like maybe 3 years ago. But, you know, we'll work with what we got. But we're talking about power over the vulnerable. And here, again, is something that I admit I don't have the wherewithal. I don't want to go into those places and take pictures. I don't want to measure the water quality. I don't want to be the OSPCA officer who has to confront abuse. When I say it, I don't want to do that. I would never sleep again, Mr. Speaker, if I had to do that as a job. I don't have what it takes. But it is incumbent upon me, and I would argue all of us, it is incumbent upon us who have the wherewithal to stand in this place in a legislature. We don't have to go out and do the dirty work. We don't have to be called upon to be brave and courageous like others are, and I'm looking at them, two of them sitting here, like others are. All we have to do is the right thing with policy, and here's our chance to do it. The right thing with policy. All we really have to do is say something so obvious that I think it's a no-brainer, anybody could agree, to ban the importation of any more orcas to live as Kiska has to live, to stop that from happening again. That's what this bill says. And to get together an expert panel to look at other regulations that are needed. And other regulations are needed. As I go back and hark again, you need a license for a dog or a cat. You don't need a license for a lion, tiger, or a whale. How ridiculous is that? So the time has come, Mr. Speaker, to act. Finally, my goodness, years later, please let's get it right. Please let's get it right. Please let's listen to all the voices. Let's listen, absolutely. I mean, I have no objection. Listen to the people in Niagara Falls. Listen to the people at Marineland. But let's also listen to those people who have made it their lifelong duty to look after animals in captivity. People like Suchek, wonderful organization. People like Animal Justice, another wonderful. People like Ontario Captive Animal Watch. Let's listen to them too, and the Veterinarian Association. Let's listen to all the voices. Let's listen to the Rosen Report and the recommendations therein, because they're good ones. And let's now finally put them into place quickly, because I wish I could say time is running out for Kiska, but it's not. Mr. Speaker, it's not running out for Kiska. She could live another 40 years in solitary confinement in a bathtub. We got to do something better. We can do something better. It's incumbent upon us to do something better. Let's do something better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions and comments. The member for Cambridge.
Speaker, it gives me pleasure to rise on behalf of my constituents in Cambridge to speak to this very important bill. I wanted to start out by thanking the member opposite for her passionate support behind the reason behind Bill 80. Animal welfare is a key priority for our government. As has been talked about, marine animals are complex, diverse, and magnificent creatures with unique needs that require the right standards of care. That's really why Bill 80, the Ontario Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Amendment Act, is being introduced. It would prohibit the breeding and acquisition of orca whales in Ontario. Orcas are extremely complex and exceptionally large animals. As we've come to know the science better, it became clear to us that our government needed to enact a ban on the breeding and acquisition of orcas in Ontario. Our government feels strongly that it's difficult to develop a suitable habitat for an animal of that magnitude. That's why we made the decision to prohibit the future acquisition and breeding of orcas in Ontario. So additionally, the bill would create a framework to establish animal welfare committees as recommended in Dr. Rosen's report. These committees would ensure planning, protection, and oversight for the animal's care, animal care plans, if you will, and access to veterinarians with expertise in marine animals and enhanced record keeping. Our government's putting in place the strongest possible standards of care and protection for marine mammals in captivity in Canada. Our government remains committed to the strongest possible standards of care and protection for marine animals in captivity, because that's what Ontarians expect, that's what these animals deserve, and that's what our government is committed to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions and comments. The member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Speaker, it's great to rise and have a comment on the speech delivered from the member from Parkdale High Park. I enjoy listening to her speak on occasion because she has such passion in every issue that comes forward. And I just like her to maybe ferret out more of an answer with regards, or direction with regards to how you talked about licensing for cats and dogs and not for lions, tigers, and bears. But the fact that licensing for cats and dogs is just filling out a form and paying a fee, it has nothing to do that you actually know how to properly care for a cat or a dog. So I don't know if I get what you're saying, but maybe tweak a little more to have a better understanding during the debate. So you know, look, I think Windsor-Tecumseh member Percy talked about the whales he met out while fishing. They're a magnificent animal to see out in the wild. I was fortunate enough before I got into politics to have a trip to Maui in February, and that was the time that the whales are in the area of Hawaii, and we had a great boat cruise. And the size and majesty of the creatures, there's two of them playing that came right under our boat, and I honestly thought if they actually lifted it out of the water, our boat would have been capsized, and it was like, holy smokes. But it's interesting to debate this, and I said our party's definitely taken a close look at this legislation and taken a careful, cautious approach to ensure that it's done right. And I'm glad our critic had the hour to speak, and I would have liked to hear you for an hour talk, but you stepped down to have a 20 minutes, but maybe we'll get you back on further readings or comments and questions. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Questions and comments. The member for Algoma, Manitoulin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to stand up on behalf of people in Algoma, Manitoulin. And I must admit, I didn't know where I stood particularly on this issue because, you know, this issue is, although there may be a lot of people that care about it across Algoma, Manitoulin, it's not something that I've actually experienced throughout the riding. But having said that, sometimes you have to refer back and you have to go back to your strength. And as a father, what did you do when you were, you know, from Northern Ontario? You came down to Marineland. You went out and visited the orcas. You went out and visited the whales, and you went out to the facilities where these beautiful creatures were swimming in their environment. And it reflected a couple of questions that my kids would ask me is, where are they going after we leave, Dad? So it made me think some more, and listening to what the member from Parkdale High Park is, sometimes you have to stand up for the most vulnerable. And it really clicked into me where it just jogged something in my mind. And again, back as a father, when you're back home and you're talking to your kids, would we accept walking by somebody's yard who has a dog who has about a 2-foot chain running around in a circle? What would I say to my kids there? Makes you think. This makes you think. And we have a responsibility here as legislators as to, if you don't have a position and you don't know what to feel, it's your job. It's your job to go out and find out people that are passionate about the issue, to find out how and what it means to them. Now, I do want to add to her that the powers of an animal are great. I need to introduce you to my dog, Abby, at home. She does have control over me, and she does make me do certain things, and I do wonderful tricks with her, but she's part of my family. She's a family member. That's the difference.
One last question or comment. The member for Burlington.
Speaker, so I'm happy to rise in my place today on behalf of my constituents in Burlington and talk about this very important piece of legislation. And I just too want to thank the member from Parkdale Hyde Park, who is an outstanding advocate, and I always enjoy listening to you. You know, we may not always agree, but I'm absolutely delighted to have you as a colleague, and I love to watch your passion for issues, and it really reminds me of why I'm here, so thank you for your comments today. And of course, my other colleagues from Cambridge, Elgin, Middlesex, Elgin, of course, Algoma, Manitoulin, and the member from Algoma was talking about his dog, and I just have to get a word in about my dog Lola, who's a friend. So I mean, one dog to another, right? And Lola's been my friend for 12 years and is part of my family too. But you're quite right; these are members of our family, and of course, marine mammals are a completely different kettle of fish. And as animal lovers, I know we all share an interest and concern in protecting our most very vulnerable, and of course, marine mammals are part of that conversation. And that's why, and the member from Parkdale High Park outlined the situation with the whale in Marineland. And that's why we're all here, to discuss this very important issue, to see where we'd agree, to come to some kinds of conclusions about what we want to do in this regard. And I think the Ontario Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, Bill 80, is an important step forward in this regard. I hope that it's going to have all-party support, and that's what I'm hearing from the members today, is an interesting concern that's common. You know, and I'm particularly pleased to see the technical advisory group that's going to be established, the opportunity for further consultation through the environmental registry, and all of our constituents will have that opportunity, and I know they will have something to say. Certainly the people in Burlington care deeply about marine animals. You know, Niagara Falls is not far away from my riding, and many of them you know, like to visit, and I know that they care deeply about the the animals and the orcas that are there. In fact, you know, I've seen a member from Windsor, Essex, earlier was talking about orcas in Newfoundland. I saw them there as well. They're absolutely magnificent creatures. And so my time is up. I could talk longer, Mr. Speaker, but unfortunately my time has run out. So thank you, colleagues, for the debate today. I look forward to further conversation. And thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're welcome. We now return to the member for Parkdale High Park for her 2-minute reply.
Speaker, and thank you to everyone who weighed in on this debate. To the person who talked about the animal welfare committees, that may be good, but they have to be autonomous. There was an animal welfare committee at Marineland. It was the trainers that loved and looked after the animals. They spoke out, they got fired, and they're being sued. They were an animal welfare committee. We can't have the same thing repeat itself. We need something that's autonomous, that isn't under the control of the owner, obviously. Licensing, of course, the member talked about that. Of course, it's only a first step. It's just a piece of paper, but at least it demands interaction with some body. It's just the first step. Oversight is clearly, and enforcement, the next two. And whales in the wild, of course, that's where we should see whales. If you want to see a whale, go see it in the wild. You don't see a whale in a swimming pool. You see the mere shadow of what could have been a whale. You see a whale suffering. As you heard Jacques Cousteau say, it's like trying to get to know humans by watching a prisoner in solitary confinement. So yes, and children need to get information about marine mammals. You can do it on wonderful 3D film technology now, if you can't get into the wild to do it. I also have a dog. I have to give her a shout out. Victoria, she has her own Facebook page. We're all invited to join it. And of course, I ring with the ending the breed-specific legislation because my dog would be covered by it if she weren't an English Bull Terrier. She, I'd like to say, has nothing in common with Don Cherry's dog, though. She is a social democrat Bull Terrier. And finally, I want to say, if we go out of this place with one thought, we have to walk out of this place with this thought, and that is, remember Kiska. Let's free Kiska. Let's not forget Kiska. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. I beg to inform the House that in the name of Her Majesty the Queen, Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor has been pleased to assent to a certain bill in her office.
Following is the title of the bill to which Her Honour did assent. An act to authorize the expenditure of certain amounts for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2015. Loi autorisant l'utilisation de certaines sommes pour l'exercice se terminant le 31 mars 2015.